got a lot of stuff going on. I'm excited about all that. I really am excited about what God's doing and what God's going to do. And so it's kind of funny when I prepare messages. Sometimes it's the week of that before I get the idea of what I'm preaching on. Sometimes when we're in a series, if we're going through a book of the Bible, I've got a real clear idea. I had the idea for this message. It came into my head in August, which is really weird because I'm not normally that far ahead. And so the impetus and the inspiration for this message today Stretch Armstrong, ladies and gentlemen. Let me introduce you to Stretch Armstrong. Speaking of toys, let me ask you a question. How many of you enjoy Legos? Any of you enjoy Legos? It's okay to admit, if you're an adult, you can raise your hand. I enjoy Legos quite a bit. Ross, you like Legos, don't you? You don't want to raise your hand, though, do you? You're sitting there in a Darth Vader sweatshirt, okay? So I love Legos. I've got boxes of Legos up in the attic that I have not let Bennett know exist because I'm not ready for him to touch them, okay? Because they are my Legos, okay? They are my Legos. 100% is how I relax. But here's the beautiful thing about Legos. Legos, they give you step-by-step instructions, right? Here you need this one piece. And actually, they've simplified them. It used to be they just showed you a picture, and like, okay, there's 37 steps in this one picture. Do it. Now, they've gone like, you got one piece, then on the second thing, you're going to get another piece. You put those pieces together, and they do it all, 11 pieces, 11 steps right there, and you're still not done building the car. But I got to tell you, it's a great way to do it because, man, if you've ever followed the Lego instructions and you miss a step, you don't find it out until you're like 8 steps later. And then you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. That doesn't work. And then you got to take it all apart and back it up. And listen, I have had Legos I have taken completely apart. I got to step 10, and I realized I missed something. I don't know what I missed. And so the only solution was, how many of you wish that God gave us instructions like Legos, right? Like the instructions for there's one Lego that somebody bought Bennett. Or no, he bought it. It was two race cars, and both instruction books were 80 pages apiece. Right. And so you know who ended up doing that one. And am I complaining? No, because I like Legos. And so now I get to play with Bennett's Legos as well, but he is still not touching mine. But here's the thing. How many of you wish God gave you that much detail? That God said, this is what you're supposed to do. This is exactly what you're supposed to do. And then next step. And you're like, man, this is great. I'm just, all right, God, let's see, Monday at 2 o'clock. This is what you want me to do? Perfect. That's right where I'll be. Wouldn't it be great if that's how God worked? But how many of you agree that's not always how God works? There's times that, we think Noah had a hard time, and I think Noah probably did have a hard time, but think about Noah. Think about Noah. Here's what God told Noah. So God said to Noah, it's in Genesis chapter 11, you don't have to turn, or Genesis 6, chapter 11, verse 11, you don't have to turn there. God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth, so make yourself an ark. Now that, for some of us, that's all the instruction we get. Make yourself an ark. All right, God, I've never built a boat, but let's get at it. But no, God said, make it of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. Ooh, God, that's a good idea. That's helpful. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top. Man, he's getting all these details. And then God tells him why he's doing it. And then he tells him you fill it with 2 kinds of every animal. God gives Noah like step-by-step instructions. Now you understand, in this time, there are many creationists and many scientists that believe up until this time, it had not rained in the world. It had not rained. It talks about the earth being watered by ground springs. Okay? So think about this. God says he's going to send a great rain and then tells Noah to build an ark and tells him step by step how to do it. But he's never seen it rain. We're like, all right, God, but you've told me everything I need to do, and so he did it. That's what it says in verse 22. It says, Noah did everything just as God commanded him. And we know that Noah and his family were spared. We know that the 2 animals that came, the pairs of animals that came, they were all there. And we know that the animals they were supposed to eat made it. And Noah, it's not like Noah had to take it wasn't like what's that the show that CBS does? They go around the world. Crazy Race, right? It's crazy. Yeah, an Amazing Race. It's not like Noah did the Amazing Race to capture animals around the world. They came to him. They came to him. And if you've ever had an animal, you know how unique that can be. But I've never had a giraffe just walk up to me and say, hey, I'm looking for a ride. But this is what happened for Noah. Great obedience, and he had great response. It was really amazing what God did. And how many of you say, God, I don't want a flood to deal with, but I would love some Noah-like instructions. I would love some real clear paths to follow. I would love to know specifically what I'm supposed to do. But how many of you know God doesn't always work like that? You know, so Tim he said, we're going to plant 4 churches, or you said 10 churches in the next 4 years. We don't know how we're going to do it. How many times have you said, all right, God, what do you want me to do? We don't know how we're going to do it. That's how it works. How many of you just wake up in the morning, you're like, God, could you just tell me like the first half of the day? It'd be so good, just so I knew that the first half of the day was going to be okay because I'm in your pure, perfect will. I would love if God would just give me like 3 out of 7 days a week, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. Right? That makes life so much easier. But that's not how it works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And I think it's hard in the Christian life to understand how to live at times because we don't have clear instructions. Now, there's certain things that we know that we're called to do about go and make disciples and to live a life that is holy and pleasing to God. But oftentimes, finding purpose in God's instructions, we're not understanding it necessarily. And sometimes, and this is God, I know you've heard this before, and so I know I'm not keeping a secret from you, but sometimes the most frustrating things for Christians is God just gives us the next step. Now, we know there's like 4,000 steps before we get to the end, but God only gives us step 1 and then leaves the other 3,999 to after we've completed step 1. Anybody ever frustrated by that? I mean, you can be honest. I mean, it's good. We're all. I mean, God's listening, but I mean, we're all here. In 2 Kings, there's a beautiful story. It's an interesting story, really, and it can be beautiful is the wrong word. It can be a confusing story. In 2 Kings, we see a story about Jehoash. Jehoash was a king of Israel that, like many kings of Israel, did evil in the sight of the Lord. And when he followed his father, he did nothing to correct the evil that his father had done. Now, sometimes, in the book of Judges, what do we see? Again, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, raises up a judge, the judge delivers them, and then again, a few years later, they do something stupid again, and God has to deliver them. But in this instance, there were a series of kings that did not follow God. They did not honor God. They did not respect the covenants, the relationships, the orders, the laws, and those things. They had the appearance of doing it, but didn't actually do it. And one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament is Elisha. Elisha was the successor to Elijah. And Elisha got a double portion, didn't he? Got a double portion. And in verse 14 of 2 Kings chapter 13, that was kind of like a Yoda way of saying it. In verse 14 of chapter 13. So in 2 Kings 13:14, we pick up with the story of Jehoash. It says this: Now Elisha was suffering from illness, was suffering from the illness from which he died. Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. And Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows. And he did so. Take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. And when he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said. He opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow over victory over Aram, Elisha declared, you will completely destroy the Arameans of Aphek. Then he said, take the arrows. And the king took them. And Elisha told him, strike the ground. He struck it 3 times and stopped. Now, how many of you, when God gives you an instruction, thinks, God, I need a little clarity as to what you want. The most recent example, not the most recent example, but one of the examples that I've leaned on frequently in life is mine and Heather's journey to becoming senior pastors. We interviewed with a bunch of churches. We had one church that we were pursuing, we were going after. It was in Binghamton, New York, right? We were up there, and we drove into town, and just clear as day, both of us went, this is not where we want to be. It was clear as day. But then there were other churches that God spoke to me, two specific churches. God spoke to me, and I told them both, God has spoken to me. I am supposed to be your next pastor. One of them had actually eliminated me from the interview process. And I called them and I said, you're wrong. You should put me back into the process. They put me back into the process, and at the end of the next round, I was the only one left. But I said, God has told me I'm your next pastor, but you have to hear him as well. Now, I can tell people what God has said to me, but God needs to speak to them as well. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I'm here to tell you what God has said. And so I told them this, and the church, they opted to go with another candidate. Was I heartbroken? I was. I was heartbroken, and it was not comparing churches. I was heartbroken because I knew God had spoken to me. They called me 6 months later, said, we made a mistake. Are you interested? And I said, no, because we were here already. And we had already accepted this position. But I had another church. They selected another candidate as well, but I told them the same thing. And they were choosing between me and one other person. And they chose the other person. Again, I was clear. I was certain I'd heard from God. They called me 12 months later. We made a mistake. Are you interested? I told them no, because we were here. Now, coming here was very interesting. Because we had walked through it, and there's times when God gave us clear yes, God gave us clear no. But when we came here, here's what God told us. Do what you want to do. Okay. All right, that's not how it works with Legos, but okay, do what you want to do. And so we chose to come here. And God has blessed that choice. That God has blessed that choice. But sometimes it's a very clear yes, sometimes it's a very clear no, and sometimes it's you do what you want to do, and I will bless your choice. That's what God did. That's what God did. And so Elisha tells the king here, strike the ground. And the king, with the certainty that many kings are possessed with, did what he thought he should do. He struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God, Elisha, was very angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will only defeat it 3 times. God gave an instruction, but it was open-ended. And when it was open-ended, what do you think might have been a wise choice of actions for the king? To pause and ask for understanding. God, you told me to strike the ground. You told me to strike the ground. How many times should I strike the ground? It's a lot like asking a teenager to do a chore. Unless you spell it out for them in detail, with diagrams, videos, YouTube tutorials, there's a good chance it's not going to get done the way you expected it to get done. That probably will get done. It's very similar to when I grew up as a child. It was a constant fight for my room to be clean. And my mother, she would not clean my room because according to her, she was not my maid. But my definition of clean did not match her definition of clean. And so they'd send me up to clean my room, and I would say, it's clean. And they'd come in and say, stuffing the stuff under the bed is not clean. But there's a walkway. There's clearly a path. Many of us, this is how we respond to the instructions of God. We take our own interpretation. We take our own understanding. We take our own thoughts of what God has said, and we go, all right, God, I did what you told me to do. And the king found himself on the wrong side. We can find ourselves obeying God, but we've done it without understanding. We've done it with poor follow-through. We have to ask for understanding. If God has given you an understanding, see, God doesn't want it to be a maze per se. It's a following of obedience. And if you do not have clarity of what to do, there's an old phrase that people have heard in churches for years that says, God can't steer a parked car. You ever heard that? You ever heard that? You're from the South, you've heard that, right? Yeah. God can't steer a parked car. It might not have made it up this far north. But what it says is, it doesn't really matter what you're doing, just do something. But if you're doing the wrong thing, then it does matter what you're doing, even if you're doing it in the name of God. Like the Crusades being a primary example, right? So the Crusades, that period of time where they said they're going to rescue Jerusalem in the name of Jesus, and they did it by killing people. That's not good. Killing people in the name of Jesus is not what God desires. It's not just a matter of doing something, it's a matter of doing the right thing. And so James chapter 1 verse 5, what it says, and if any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. If you do not know what to do, what should you do? Ask for understanding. And if God says, I want you to do this, and you're like, okay, God, I'm not sure how. If the king had paused and said, how many times should I strike the ground? I truly believe that God would have given him an answer that says, strike it as many times as you can so that your victory will be complete. But that's not what he did. We have to ask for understanding. We have to ask for understanding. And here's why it's important. Because that's the only way to follow the instructions, is if we understand what God is asking us. And sometimes God will just give us the next step. And sometimes it will be multiple steps. The important thing is not how far forward you see, but how well you follow the leading of God. And I want to give you a word of caution here. I grew up in the church. Again, I grew up in the church my whole life. We had a youth pastor who was sharing a message one time about taking what God gives you to do and do it to the fullest. Do it big, right? And he used the example of Jehoash, right? He said, strike the ground. And then he used the example of Moses. I forgot his name for a second there. Of Moses. And he said, Moses didn't just speak to the rock. Moses struck the rock. Okay, here's the problem. Moses was instructed to speak to the rock. He wasn't instructed to strike the rock. And because he struck the rock, what happened? He wasn't allowed to go to the promised land. So this is a word of caution. Just flailing around for God is not sufficient. Now, there are ways that God speaks to us. One of the best missionary speakers I've ever heard was a guy named Doug Lowenberg. Doug Lowenberg is by far the fastest talker I've ever heard in my life. He taught in my Bible college. But here's what he said. So one time, he said one of the best ways you can often hear the voice of God is just by seeing the need. Just by seeing the need. The Bible tells us very clearly to take care of the widows, the orphan, and the poor. So to provide help and benevolence to somebody, do you need instructions from God? Well, you've already got them, right? To tell somebody about Jesus, do you need the instructions from God? No. But sometimes what people do is they go, I'm going to build this enormous. I had a guy, it was about 3 years ago, said, I'm going to start a nonprofit. I want to start a nonprofit organization to help children in need. And it's a wonderful idea. Wonderful idea. Zero follow through. Nothing happened. Because it was his idea. It wasn't God's idea. It wasn't God's idea. Moses was instructed to speak to the rock. Ask for understanding, and then follow the instructions. It's a word of caution I want to give you because I want you to understand something. Here we are. We're the last Sunday of our missions convention. And each year, when we do this, and if you're a guest here or you're new to Calvary, you might not have been a part of this. I want to understand it. So each year, we support missionaries around the world. We have 56 missionary units that we do, 55 if you blend the two. We had one that was, we give to the Senders Fund, which helps send, when missionaries first get started, they're raising support, they need help. We give to that, but we also gave to one that's called Cash for Candidates. And so I had to ask what the difference was. They're the same thing. They just had multiple names. And so I guess it's 55, not 56. It's close. We're close. But here's the thing. Every month we give $6,450 or so to missions to support ministries around the world. Yeah, absolutely. It's something to be excited about. And I told you that this last year we're in the top 1% of mission-giving churches in the Assemblies of God. We are a church that loves missions. And today we're going to talk about a commitment that I want you to make to give to missions over this next year. But I'm not going to tell you how much you should give, because I'm not God. If you hadn't figured that one out, I want to make sure I clear that up. I am here simply to speak what I believe God has told me to speak for the day, but I want God to speak to you for the commitment that you're supposed to make. And every year, we always take faith promises. We take faith promises to support our missionaries. That's why we're able to bring in missionaries. That's why $6,450 a month is what we give. Last year, we gave about $73,000 above the monthly support to support special projects. We gave over $25,000 last year to Convoy of Hope. We gave $8,000 to Fire Bible, to Global University. Global University has 750,000 students around the world. We gave them. Honestly, that's just. I want us to give money to programs and ministries that have a global impact. Right? That's why we love it. But here's the thing. All of that was made possible through the commitments and giving of this church. And we're going to do that at the end of service today. And that's why Stretch Armstrong's here with us. But I want you to understand something. God speaks to us to give us clarity. We had a minister come out one time at our church we were in La Mesa, California, and they were taking a special offering the next day, and I didn't make very much money. I was living in a church house, and so they considered that the lion's share of my salary. I was making like $19,000 a year. And if you don't know this or not, ministers we are employees of the church for everything except for taxes. And so I pay self-employment tax. I pay both parts of Social Security. Now, our church is very generous. They help out significantly with that. But taxes, I hate filing taxes. I never get a return. I always owe money. And it's not a complaint. It's just how it works. But I was making $19,000 a year. So by the time taxes and everything were done, I was making like $14,000 or something. It was some ridiculous number. And we're praying about giving a special offering. And I had no idea what to give. Heather and I had just gotten married. You know how it is, right? You know how a lot of money. Heather was she'd finished school, and so we got married with her school debt. And you go, man, that's kind of stretching it, isn't it? Kind of pushing it. God woke me up in the middle of the night and gave me a number. It's the weirdest thing. It's the only time it's ever happened. But I looked at the clock, and it was 3:33, and I felt clear as day that God said that's how much you're supposed to give. And I want to tell you, at that moment in time, that was a stretch. That was hard. But that's what I gave. Why? Because God gave me an instruction, and I cleared it up. It wasn't just a sleepy, oh, okay. But I asked the question, God, is this what you want me to do? And He was clear. Yes, that's what He wanted me to do. You know, we have to ask the right questions. I do a lot of coaching. I've done a lot of coaching in ministry, and you know the key to being a good coach is asking the right questions. When I do counseling with folks, I've been told many, many times, that's a good question. And I say, thank you. I pride myself on my ability to ask questions. I don't necessarily have a lot of answers, but I've got a lot of questions. When we ask the right questions, do you know what we start hearing? The voice of God. A lot of us don't hear God's voice because we don't ask to hear it. I will tell you the same thing I taught every children's ministry class on hearing the Holy Spirit. God is always talking. The question is, are we listening? God is always talking. Asking the right questions opens doors. Asking the right questions, it clears up the uncertainty when we're not sure what to do. And if we do not get an answer, now I want to pause there. If we do not get an answer, not if we do not get an answer we don't like. Right. If we do not get an answer, you know what my recommendation is? Is not to make a move. Is to wait. Because those that wait on the Lord, they renew their strength. Those that wait on the Lord find the clarity and the certainty. And you might not get a lot of an answer. And part of that might be because God knows you can't handle a lot. Listen, if you tell me how to come to your house and you give me 15 steps, I promise you I'm just going to look at you and say, give me the address and I'll follow GPS. Because I'm only good for about 2 pieces of direction, right? I don't use the GPS to get to my house anymore, but that's about it. When I'm going down going down to Taylor Sam's, I'm still GPSing it. Why? Because I've been here for 5.5 years and I don't pay attention when I drive someplace. And I realize it's just 2 turns. It's just 2 turns, but I do it. Why? Because I'm only good for about 2 steps. I really know that. And so it is frustrating, but that's how God treats us. We got to ask the right questions. You know one of the questions I want us to ask when we talk about missions, when we talk about giving, we talk about what is possible. What is possible? What could happen? What could happen? Well, let me show you what's going on right now in missions in the United States of God. What is possible? What's going on? Let's look at the next slide there. This is right now we have 2,640 missionaries on the field between career missionaries and missionary associates. We have 1,525 individuals that went on short-term mission trips with a total of 486 mission trips. This is the Assemblies of God as a whole, not just us as a church. That'd be amazing if us as a church, but we are part of the Assemblies of God. This is what the Assemblies of God USA has done in this as of December 31st, 2021. We haven't got the 2022 yet. There are 1,228 missionary kids in preschool through high school, 253 missionary kids. So that gives you an idea of the families that we have. What's possible? Well, where do we fall? Listen, I really believe God's calling people to be missionaries in this room. Young and old, missionaries in this room. The short-term trips, I hope next year we're in that number, right? I want you to go to Macedonia. Adrian doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to try and slip another one in there. Let's see the next one. This is what's possible. Let's see the next one here. 252 countries, territories, and provinces that we've served. 53.7 million constituents around the world. That's not quite accurate because the last number was 70 million members of the Assemblies of God. 367,398 churches in the world. 336,971 ministers, global partnership. Let's see the next one. Every 54 seconds, one new believer is added to the church. Every 76 minutes, one new minister is enlisted. You notice the difference in those numbers? That means every 76 minutes, there's 76 new believers that need a pastor. Right? Right? So we need to up the 76 one. Every 81 minutes, one new church is planted. Now, Tim wants to take 4 years to do 10. He's off the clock, but you'll get there. All right. Giving, $232.7 million given to missions. Given to missions. That's phenomenal. We're part of that. We gave like 218 or something like 200,000. We gave a little over $200,000 last year. That's amazing. What is possible? That's possible. You know the next question we have to ask? What is needed? What is needed? Show us that next slide. In Africa, we have this. In Africa, there's 235 missionaries and 116 associates. There's 16.7 million Assemblies of God people with 83,286 churches. Can I tell you the need in Africa? There are 867. That last category, it's probably hard for you to read. I'll read it to you. 867 unreached people groups. That's just on one continent. What's the need? Asia Pacific, there's 1,123 unreached people groups. Is there a need for new missionaries? Is there a need for new missions? Absolutely. In Eurasia, where Tim serves, there are 5,356 unreached people groups. If we just sent one person to each of those people groups, we're already at 7,000 new missionaries that we need. Europe, there's 1,161 unreached people groups. In Latin America, 642 unreached people groups. North Asia, 469 unreached people groups. And then we have international ministries, which are things such as Builders International, who we gave like $12,000 to them last year. They're a wonderful ministry. If we just added up the unreached people groups, we need 9,000 new missionaries. And that's if we just sent one person. What's the need? The need is so vast, it's almost immeasurable. But here's the beautiful thing. You remember Brad Rosenberg last week. The math of God doesn't work. 5 + 2 = 7. But 5 + 2 with God equaled baskets left over. 15,000, 20,000 people fed. It's an amazing thing. Asking the right questions is where I found myself this year. I already told you what we've done as a church. Last year, we gave a little over $200,000. We had $6,450 a month in mission support. We gave about $73,000 in special projects. But we've got to ask the right questions. And it's where I found myself this year. It's where I found myself in this message. And here's the question that I asked. Because every year we'd have a globe or a collection box, and we would take up a faith promise. A faith promise was a commitment between you and God to support missionaries and to support missions. And the question I asked myself is a faith promise helpful? Is it helpful? Let's look at the statistics from last year. In 2021, we received $115,000 in promises, in faith pledges. Okay? Now, I told you we gave like $137,000 plus the special appeals, which is great. But if you look at those that made faith promises, we only received about 80% of what was pledged from those that made the pledge. And then, I understand, this is between you and God. We're not judging anybody. This is how it works sometimes. But we actually received $137,000. So the data that I got from faith promises, what did it do for me? Nothing. It didn't tell me a thing. And then God gave me a revelation where He gives me a lot of revelations is when I'm taking a shower in the morning because my mind's not thinking about anything. Here's what God said to me. He said, this year you've approached faith promises wrong. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong or saying that they were wrong to do, but I realized something. I had told you that the amount of ministry we're able to support is dependent upon your faith promises. Do you know the problem with that? It makes the ministry of the church dependent upon you being the source. But who is the source for you? God. Who is the source for this church? God. So this year, rather than waiting to determine what we're going to give as a church based upon the faith promises that come in, I have felt very clearly led that we're going to increase our monthly support from $6,450 to $7,100 because we have 6 missionaries that are waiting for somebody to pick them up, and we're going to pick them up. We're going to pick up 6 new missionaries. $100 a month each one. We're going to increase the giving. Why? Because what is Stretch Armstrong known for doing? It's in the name. Yeah, that's right. It's for stretching, right? This is what Stretch Armstrong does, okay? Stretch Armstrong does this. But as soon as you let go, say, watch this. I'm going to let go. See what happens? The arms go back, don't they? Do you know one of my jobs as the pastor of this church is to stretch us? Is to stretch us. Yeah, how many of you are like, oh man, I wish I could do that to my back. Get a good twist in there. Go see Scott Lloyd. He's a chiropractor. He'll help you. But listen, stretch. But as soon as I stop stretching, what happens? It goes back. There are many people in our church, I'm sure, that each year they give the same faith promise. When God sent Joash to Elisha, if Joash had asked for understanding of God, what should I do? He would have done more. Now, I'm not saying that you need to give more than you did this last year. But I am saying, have you asked God for what your commitment should be? See, it's a new approach to how we're doing things. And in a church, I know this church, after 5.5 years of being here, here's what I know about this church. This church loves missions. You love missions. We have missionaries come. You guys hang out at that table forever. You don't talk to the missionaries. The amount of support that we get for missions is phenomenal. You love missions. And in a church that didn't have a heart for missions, I probably wouldn't try this first off. Well, I've been here for 5.5 years, and now we're just trying it. This year, we're not going to do faith promises. This year, I'm going to ask you to do something different. At the end of service, the ushers are going to give you this. And I want to explain what this is. The first thing I need you to do before you even look at this, I want you to pray and ask God this year what is it that you desire for me to do? This year, what is it you desire for me to do? One of the big things I believe in missions is this, and you guys have probably figured this out. I am not shy about talking about money. Why? Because the Bible talks about money more than any other subject, right? Jesus had more verses about money than any other subject. Brad shared that last week. I thought it was very true. But here, it is very true. I'm not shy about it because the way that we find the blessing of God is through obedience. Now, I want you to understand, I say it every time I say this. The blessing of God is not necessarily financial prosperity. So it is not an equation that you give to get, right? It's not how it works. This is not formulaic. But here's the thing I know. The tithe is the basis. It's the basic. It's the bottom line, right? 10%. That's what the Bible says. And I celebrate it when you tithe because it's a sign of spiritual maturity. Anything given over the tithe, you know what that is? That's an offering. That's an offering. One of the things I truly believe, it is not anybody's responsibility. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And if you're not currently giving to missions, I want to challenge you in this. I want to challenge you to stretch where you're at. And if you're already given to missions, I want you to stretch a little further. And if you feel like you're giving a lot to missions, which you probably are, I want to stretch you even further. How do we do that? Well, this is the new approach that I want to take. The first one, it says plan. That first one, it says plan. Go ahead and throw that up there, guys. It says plan. Proverbs 21:5 says this: the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. Here's the thought. If you make no change to your monthly budget, what could you commit to give? Whatever that amount is, have a plan in place and work that plan and be obedient with it. If you say, well, I could cut out 1 or 2 Starbucks a week, so there's $14 a week I could cut out, so that's $56 a month. Well, a $50 a month pledge, that's a good pledge. That's a good pledge. Then work the plan. You give $50 a month, what are you going to give a year? You're going to give $600 a year. What did you give last year? Nothing. 600 is more than nothing, and so I'm proud. It's incredible. But let's say you're already giving. Well, I want you to have a vision. I want you to have a vision for it. Habakkuk 2:2. How many of you have ever actually read in the book of Habakkuk? Yeah, okay. It's not, so you got to be on a yearly reading plan to get to Habakkuk. Here's what it says, Habakkuk 2:2. Then the Lord replied, write down the vision and make it plain on tablets so the herald may run with it. Here's what I want you to do. If you already have a commitment to give Faith Promise or give to missions, I want you to do this. I want you to ask God to give you a vision for what He could do through you with His help. This is beyond your beyond your natural income and requires a step of faith. And then the third thing I want you to do is to dream. It's to dream. Ephesians 3:20 tells us this: now to Him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. If you could have a dream, what could you give? Brad Rosenberg told us his dream last week. Such a powerful testimony, and it transformed his church. And his dream might not necessarily be your dream, but you have to hear from God on this one. But God told him the largest check that goes out every month from his income should be his Faith Promise, larger than his mortgage, larger than any other bill. I'm not saying that that's what it looks like to really dream for God. I don't play that game, but I want to tell you this: when God speaks to us, He makes a way possible. But what do I want to do with your Faith Promise? What do I want to do with your commitment to missions? I want you to ask the right questions. I want you to ask for understanding. I want you to follow the instructions. I want you to stretch. I want you to stretch your faith. I want you to stretch your giving. I want you to understand this is what we're going to try and do next year. We're going to believe God for. We're going to believe God for $7,100 a month in Faith Promise giving or missions and monthly support. Next year, we're going to give $25,000 to Convoy of Hope. We're going to give $10,000 to Fire Bible, $10,000 to Global University, and then the other thing that pastors always love to say, others as needed, because we will give away all that we can. But I believe this is a church that has a heart for missions. And I believe it's something that we can do. But it's going to require all of us to stretch. And so here's the right question. I want to give it to you. The right question to ask is this: what is my part? What is my part? Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. 3 or 4 years ago, we got a faith promise from a young man, 11 years old. Gave like $5 that year. Listen, an 11-year-old giving $5 up for missions? That's a miracle. It's a miracle. I don't want to be Jehoash, where I take the instruction that God gave me and do as little with it as possible. I don't want to be Moses and exceed what God tells me to do. I want to be somebody faithful to the call that God has given us. And so this morning, on your way out today, you're not going to give this back to me. This is what we're going to commit to as a church. But I want you to take this and come up with a plan. Come up with a vision. Come up with a dream. And then let God use you in such a mighty and powerful way that it transforms the world. If Jehoash had done more than he did, his enemy would have been destroyed completely. Noah followed the instructions of God exactly as God instructed him to, and he was saved. I want you to be blessed like that. I want you to be blessed like that. And so this morning, I want to challenge you to stretch. Stretch. And if all you see in your head as you pray is this, it's okay. It's okay, because this is what I want you to see, is God stretching you. Because God has more for you. He has more for you. And the reality is, if it's not us, then who's going to do it? It needs to be us. That's my challenge for you this morning. That's my encouragement for you this morning. It's what I believe God for from you. Amen. Amen.